I am doing this one in English as I have been asked by some Anglo friends, acquaintances and students, as they seemed curious to know what I was bragging about while talking about films. So here it is. The other day I was in front of the window and I saw a man staring at me, and then a woman joined and they both started staring at me, and I was like, what? And they kept staring with this really unsettling look, and I yelled, what the hell are you looking at? And he yelled, get the hell out of my garden, you Peeping Tom. And I went like, how does he know my name? And then she yelled, you psycho. And I went like, psycho and Peeping Tom, that's a good video, that's a good story. So I thanked them, put my camera away, and went back home. Peeping Tom by Michael Powell and Psycho by Alfred Hitchcock are both horror thrillers. Both consist of a plot that deals with serial killing and psychosis. Both are two-act stories. Both were released in 1960, yet Psycho managed to consacrate definitely Alfred Hitchcock as a master of filmmaking, and Peeping Tom basically destroyed Michael Powell's career. Why is that? Today, for the Understanding Art Through Comparison of Social Isolation series, a video that will teach filmmakers and aficionados how to avoid professional death by serial killing. It was 1960 when both films were produced. Both Alfred and Michael had shot a good number of very good films. They already were two famous directors. Hitchcock more than Powell, given the choice to go and shoot films in America. Let's take a look at the two movies and compare them. Spoilers ahead. Peeping Tom, Act One. A man with a camera kills a prostitute. This man is Mark, whose activity is taking films of his victims and taking pictures of naked girls for under-the-counter pictures and magazines. He's obsessed not by beauty but by morbid observation. He lives in a small apartment. His neighbor offers him a piece of cake for her birthday, and he introduces her into his lab, where he shows her films of him as a child being a guinea pig for his father's studies of fear in children. She is shocked, but they like each other a lot. Her mother is blind. Mark also works as a focus puller at Pinewood Studios. Wanting to be a director, one evening he organizes for a secret shoot with a stand-in and kills her after a beautiful, beautiful scene. The body is discovered the day after during the shooting of a scene of the official movie. Act 2. The police link the two murders as both women died with an expression of utter fear on their face. Mark spies on the police while they're investigating. Helen and Mark go out for dinner and she convinces him to leave the camera at home. Once back at home, Mark is confronted by Helen's blind mother. He compulsively screens his snuff movies to the blind woman, who senses that something is wrong and makes him swear that he will never film or photograph Helen. Another beautiful, beautiful scene. A psychiatrist is on the set of the movie to console the star. Mark inquires with him about scoptophilia, being a Peeping Tom, as the doctor tells him that he recalls his father and that he has his father's eyes. Because of the topic of the chat that the psychiatrist had with Mark, the police start tailing Mark. He goes back to take pictures of Millie and he kills her. That's the first boob of British cinema. In the meantime, Helen watches Mark's films in secret, and when he gets there, she confronts him. He reveals that he makes those films in order to be able to capture the fear of his victims. He has mounted a round mirror atop of his camera so that he can capture the reactions of his victims while they are being killed, while they are seeing their impending death. He refuses to kill Helen. As the police is about to corner him, Mark kills himself, recording his own death with the camera, the mirror, and taking pictures of the act. Psycho, Act 1. Spoilers alert. Marion Crane and her boyfriend Sam have a lunch motel appointment, and before parting they discuss how they cannot get married because of his debts. She gets the chance to get hold of $40,000 from her office and run away with them to go to Sam. She sleeps on the road and is questioned by a policeman the morning after. She rushes away suspiciously and she manages to exchange the car, but the policeman is still following her. She keeps running away and ends up spending the second night in a secluded motel. The owner does his best to accommodate her needs, despite his evil mother shouting her dissent from her house. He turns out to be weird and morbidly attached to his ill mother. That evening, she decides to go back to Phoenix and give the money back. When she goes back to her room, Norman Bates, the owner of the motel, peeps on her while getting undressed and then rushes back to his home. While showering, Marion gets killed by the mother, allegedly. When Norman finds out what her mother has allegedly done, he cleans the toilet, he cleans the room, gets rid of the body and the car and the money, not knowingly, in the swamp. Act 2. More spoilers ahead. Marion's sister Lila goes to Sam's town to inquire about her sister. He tells her that she's not there. Arbogast, a private detective from the company that Marion has stole from, decides to join forces with them to try and find the woman. He ends up interviewing Norman at the Bates Motel. Norman trips in his own lies, and Arbogast decides to spy in the Bates house while Norman's gone. The mother kills Arbogast too, allegedly. As Arbogast doesn't get back to town, Sam decides to visit the Bates Motel and he sees the silhouette of the mother through a window, but she doesn't open the door when he knocks. Lila and Sam visit the sheriff, who tells them that Mrs. Bates died in a murder-suicide a few years back. Lila and Sam go back to the Bates Motel, and while Sam confronts Norman in his office, she goes and searches the house. The confrontation between the two men becomes violent and Norman manages to overcome Sam and runs after Lila into the house. The woman hides and she finds Norman's mother in the basement, but she's an embalmed corpse. Norman, dressed as his mother, is about to kill her, but Sam manages to stop him and saves Lila. In a court, a psychiatrist tells police and Sam and Lila the whole story that he understood. He didn't understand it from Norman, he understood it from the mother, because Norman has two personalities and the mother has overcome completely Norman's personality. She testified that her son killed her and the man she loved a few years back. And it was from that moment that the man's psyche split into half Norman, half mother. So the two films are quite different in their similarities. Let's take a look at some elements. The setting. One is set in the US, the other is set in London. Psycho takes place in the province, the towns, between Phoenix and California. Sand, rocks, forests, swamps. The place where the killer lives is an almost abandoned and forgotten spot belonging to the past. The house a shrine for what mother was, and the office a minimalistic, static zoo that belongs exclusively to Norman. Peeping Tom is in central London, Soho, Mayfair, smog and bricks and crowd and sin. The building where Mark lives is his father's house, the ground floor rented out to Helen and her mother. His cave of operation is a film lab in the dark, a fortress of isolation, where he can relive what he has witnessed. The biggest difference might be in the stylistic choices. Pornographic look versus slick elegance. The choice of color and lighting of Peeping Tom reminds us of the under-the-counter pornographic magazine for which Soho became famous. A lusty, pregnant saturation. Powell was infamous for his incredible skills in using color in other movies like Black Narcissus or The Red Shoes. Psycho's slick, neat, and sharp black and white recalls the noir and horror films of the previous decades, managing to keep the mix of locations under control through the use of a coherent look and style. Both locations and look support another big thematic difference. The sin element in Peeping Tom is obsession and sex. The sin element in Psycho is theft. That's why both looks are coherent with the story they tell. Talking about the story and the screenplay, how are the two psyches of the two characters dealt with? So the two themes are different. Peeping Tom is about fear and obsession. Psycho is about guilt. In Peeping Tom, the characters' psychological story is narrated through the films that his father shot to study the child's fears. That allows the medium of the peeping to become a justifiable object of the obsession and the fear. His own fear, the fear of fear, to become the psychological substratum of his filming. Therefore, the complexity of the character becomes the actual story of the film. Our path during the story is to understand how and why he has become what he has become. It's comprehensibly difficult and complex for the average viewer of the 60s. In Psycho, the character's psychology is brilliantly acted by Perkins. But the whole backstory isn't told until the very end by a third party, when the psychiatrist explains why and how Norman has his personality split. That's why we don't really care or feel for the character. What is left is more the plot rather than the psychological motivations. Talking about plot, in Peeping Tom we know who the killer is since the very beginning of the film. So the goal of the film is to understand why he does it. Therefore, the depth of research in the character. In Psycho, we only know that a crazy old woman is a serial killer and that her son is helping her not to get busted. So the goal of the movie is to understand who the mother is. The main difference lies into those verbs: understand a character and discover somebody. And that's why Psycho became more appealing and immediate, for the thriller aspect of it. The cast and the acting, the direction of the actors is very different in these two films. Psycho is naturalistic, dry, minimalistic, and pointed at creating space for attention that rises in order to climax into those violent moments and horror situations. Peeping Tom has a more melodramatic approach, an almost constant overtone in the expressions and the delivery of the lines, neither theatrical nor dramatic, almost surreal. Janet Leigh's amazing voice delivery versus Anna Massey's overstated innocence. Vera Miles's movements versus Maxine O'Daly's overdramatic blindness. Anthony Perkins' undertones and voice versus Carl Boehm's German accent. Yes, he was German. The issue of identification. The external look versus the point of view. In Power, we are the disturbed since the very beginning. We are watching in first person through the lens of the killer camera, and therefore we are the killer. We stop and deal with the prostitute. We follow her to her apartment. We watch her undress. We scare her. We kill her. Unsatisfied, we go back the morning after in the alley. We film the corpse being taken away by the cops. As we understand that we are looking at the world through Mark's lens, his compulsion is already our compulsion. Psycho opens with two lovers in a room. A scene alright, but common and understandable. So much so that Sam tells Marion that he wants to make it official. We are not in the story. The look is objective. We are being told a story. Only when the main character is killed at the end of Act 1, we have no other choice than identifying with the only character left, which happens to be the serial killer. This works only because we have seen the story objectively. But the character of the mother still remains as the villain. Objectivity versus subjectivity. Hitchcock tells us a story. Powell works using filmmaking as a thematic tool. So our own filming, our own taking pictures and watching that film makes us all perverts. In conclusion, I believe that it was a mix of all these elements that made Psycho a zeitgeist movie, while Peeping Tom, despite his more classic style and look, was too thematically advanced to be understood and accepted by the audience. So it remained stuck in this self-inflicted dichotomy until it slowly became a cult rather than a classic. The other reason why Peeping Tom was declassified by the 60s distribution is the explicit sexual component. The perversion, the morbidity that an Anglo-Protestant middle class and a medieval Catholic one would have never accepted. Sex in Psycho is only scratched, and the illegality of the affair almost immediately made acceptable by the statement of the engagement, the moral legitimation for religiously acceptable intimacy. But if I have to pinpoint one, I also think that the difference stood in this one element: Anthony Perkins. As aforementioned, he was perfectly cast, and casting is probably the most important aspect of a director's job. But he wasn't just right for the part. He was an amazing actor, a gem, simple yet expressive, never monotonous, although dry, effective and minimalistic. He was extremely nuanced in his actions, but never melodramatic. The sickness of the character was always there, yet never explained. Readable, but never fully understandable. Therefore, capable of creating tension, where the cinematography helped sustaining his subconscious rather than just explaining the environments and topics. Perkins, in my opinion, was the key to project Psycho into a new, more modern way of telling stories. I will end by making this super uneasy for everyone. Thanks for watching me. Ciao.